Sure. Pastor James, in the sermon today, at one point he was talking about, what was he talking about? He talked about, whatever it is you're doing, what you're called to do, what your gifts are, whatever you find yourself engaged in, remember who you're representing. In a sense, you're representing God. So act the part. And it kind of called to mind. Last night, Heather and I went down to the symphony for a concert. And we like to do that once in a while, once every 20 years or so. We go down there.
So cultured.
Yeah. But it reminded me, there was the Hilbert Theater, the stage. If you're in the audience, the seats are below the stage. So if you're near the front of the auditorium, the stage floor is at eye level as you're sitting in your seat. So you've got a good view of everybody's shoes who are playing in the orchestra. So we're sitting there staring at everybody's shoes for an hour or so. And I noticed one young man playing the viola. He has holes in his socks. He's wearing socks he has holes in it, and they're floppy socks. It's like, dude, you're playing with the symphony. Do I need to give you $8 so you can go buy yourself a nice pair of socks?
He dresses himself. Yeah, probably.
He was a young guy. He looked very young. So
Because it gets hot up there.
I guess.
If you sit in the student section or reset, you'll be like near the ceiling and you don't notice any of it.
Okay. Well, see, that's where we usually sit. This last time was the first time we'd been down that close, and I said, well.
And you had to see the whole thing.
Then we had to watch Holy Socks. Yeah. So anyway, again, dress appropriately for whatever it is you're doing is the lesson, I guess.
But what's the music?
The music was very good. The music was very good. I don't want to.
There were a lot of God gifts, Chinese people, and all truly, these are some exceptionally gifted.
Yeah. He's up there. He's up there playing orchestra. I'm not. So who am I to criticize his socks? But if it were me, I would have some nice socks on, especially knowing somebody is sitting with their eyes even with my socks.
You have a tie on.
They all dressed very well. They're all black, black dresses for the women and black coat and ties and stuff. Anyway, but he had bad socks. So that's how we remember him.
All got our gifts.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to look at the rest of Mark chapter 10 today, as Jesus and the disciples continue their walk toward Jerusalem. Let's see where. Yeah, we're going to do verse 32 to the end of the chapter. So I will just go ahead and read it, and then we'll get into discussion. They were on their way up to Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We are going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. All right. So we start off. The way this is written, it seems odd at first. Verse 32 says, they were on their way with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished while those who followed were afraid. Afraid of what? I mean, is it really that, is this kind of going along at the same time that Jesus tells them one more, for the third time, he's going to tell them that he's going to be killed? And is that what they're astonished about? And that's what they're afraid about? I mean, because the other gospels, they make the point that Jesus he knows what's going to happen. He's the one facing death, and he's leading the way. He's kind of saying, I'm not afraid. I'm going right ahead. And maybe they're all just kind of lagging back saying, do we really want to be part of this? Particularly because in chapter 8 and chapter 9 here in Mark, the two previous times where Jesus has said he's going to be killed, he hasn't really given any detail. But here all of a sudden he's saying, well, the chief priests and the teachers of the law are going to slander me and condemn me to death and then hand me over to the Romans, and the Romans are actually going to be the ones who kill me. So it's kind of, he's unveiling this, basically it's a conspiracy, is it not, against Jesus. So he's kind of outlined this, this process that's maybe a much larger scope than they had thought before when he just said that he was going to be put to death. He's finally giving them some particulars about it, and so maybe they're astonished. They said, "Whoa, what's all this about, Kevin?"
Has there been enough conflict that has happened between the leaders that are primarily central to Jerusalem and the way Jerusalem works, that they are astonished that he's leading the way, knowing that there's this grand opposition, and they're actually trying to kill him? There's not just opposition. They're not just trying to slander him. They're actually trying to kill him, and that he is in the front of the group leading the way. Maybe that's the astonishment.
Yeah. I would agree with that. It seemed like an odd way he structured, Mark structured this paragraph, that the astonishment comes before telling us why they're astonished. Nobody seemed to be interested in that in all the commentary I read. So I don't know. So anyway, so there's this fate that Jesus is he's leading the way, walking right into it. So on number 2 here, I've got the modern translation, and I did a lot of research, and I came up. There's a new translation of this passage that none of you have read before. I'm going to disclose it now, because this is kind of how a lot of people today might say this. Verse 34 or verse 33. We're going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him and said, yeah, that's all great, but we got something we want to ask you because it's important to us. Is that just strange? He says this, yeah, there's this conspiracy against me. I'm going to die. And they come in to say, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Is that just odd? I mean, even by the scale of, some of the misguided things they've said before, this is just, it's a new level of missing the point. Is it not?
This means that James and John were millennials.
Yeah.
Way ahead of their time.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that's my modern take on it. Yeah, maybe it's the millennial translation that, yeah, that's great. You're going to die, okay, but we have something to ask for us. But is that really that unusual for most people? Do we not all at one point or another say, what's in it for me, or how do I maneuver in this situation and make it profitable for me, or work to my advantage? How do I get something good out of this for me?
And the point that they are squeezing this in before he gets to Jerusalem, does it mean that they get a sense that something big's going to happen here and he's really going to be crowned king of Israel? And we just want to make sure before Peter and Andrew figure this out, that we want to get in there first and get our request in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be, because in verse 41, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Maybe they're just indignant because they didn't think of it first. They didn't get to ask Jesus first where they were going to be able to sit.
They want to call the windows.
Yeah. Everybody's competitive at one level or another. Who wants the best seat? Anyway, this all arises probably in Matthew chapter 19. Mark, in his telling of this, in this passage, doesn't have this specific quotation from Jesus, but in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That's in Matthew. That's not, Mark doesn't have that in his retelling of it. So that's probably what they're thinking about. Well, we've all got a throne, but being at the right hand and the left hand of Jesus, that's a special spot. So why not us? Why not me? Darn it, I'm worthy. I don't know. But it just seems such an odd thing to say, give us anything we ask. I mean, if your kids ever came to you and said, give me anything I ask, what's your first response? Heather?
Depends on whether it was my daughter.
Well,
Yeah,
two
if it's
things.
Maggie, he gives it to her.
Aw, baby.
Pretty true.
Baby. Two things stick out. One is that last week you talked about Mark 10:29. Truly, I tell you, no one who's left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age.
Mm-hmm.
So he had said that maybe recently, and they're thinking, whoa, I've given up all kinds of things, and what am I getting? They may be focused on that. But the other interesting thing is this is the third time he's told them what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not listening. It's like they can't listen. They're not really hearing that, is what it seems like is the time after time. But maybe they heard this.
It's just strange. I mean, they've heard it 3 times. He's got very specific with it this time. And they're talking about, once you're in your glory, which kind of doesn't that suggest they understand that he's going to die and be raised to glory. So It's just they're the way they do this is just strange to me. Again, not that we don't all have our own moments of selfishness and thinking of ourselves and acting inappropriately in those situations, Lynn.
Well, I think in our humanness, we kind of cycle through different emotions. You get a new job or you get a new ministry position, and at first you're kind of intimidated, like, I can't believe I'm part of this. Wow, this is, am I worthy? Am I good enough? Can I do it? And then you start getting a little more comfortable, and then you get a little full of yourself, and then something has to knock you back down. And, I think it's just like all that humanness, and they have seen that he can do anything.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good sign here that they finally are getting the point that he can do any and all things.
Right.
But then I think this is a moment where they're just a little bit too big for their britches and just like a little too nervy to say, hey. psst.
Yeah.
Can we, because they're trying to beat out the other 10,
Yeah.
which is a little rude.
Yeah.
But maybe they feel like, hey, we did get to go up on the mountain with you,
Well, that makes them special.
So while Peter's not here.
They did get classified as the Sons of Thunder.
Yeah.
They were.
Yeah.
I learned that in the Chosen.
Thanks, Jeff.
Have you seen the Jesus movie yet, Jim?
Yes.
Okay. Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked it. The one thing I really did not like, though, was having to revisit all the clothes
Yeah.
from the early 70s.
Yeah.
That was painful.
Nothing wrong with belly.
There's a lot.
Do they match closely with what you've got in your closet now?
Actually, no. I've gotten rid of
Okay.
most of my early 70s clothes.
Did you have long hair?
Gabbard.
I did have long hair.
Did you have hair?
I had hair and it was long. Yeah.
Did you have a mint green double deck
It was brown, I think. Mine was brown.
Brown and green.
And then another thing I wonder about here, or I would think people would wonder about, and I didn't I couldn't find anything about this. In verse 40, Jesus says, "To sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." Which is, of course, raises the question, well, who are they for then? But no commentator, nothing I read anywhere in preparing this lesson, nobody ventured a guess. Nobody even said, we don't even know. It was totally ignored, which I thought was strange. Because I wonder, wouldn't you like to know?
Moses and
Moses.
Elijah.
Moses and Elijah, right?
Well,
They were on the-
maybe.
And I
I don't
also
know.
think they were, to me, they didn't say that they could drink from the cup, the same cup that Jesus. Wow. That's putting themselves on the same level, some kind
Yeah, and one commentary I read did point out that this whole concept of drinking from a cup in terms of undergoing troubles, it was not an unknown metaphor to use, that people would talk about the cup they had to drink, or the baptism they underwent, an immersion in some kind of trouble. Here's this cup full of problems that you have. That's your cup to drink.
of.
So Jesus he's not just talking about, the cup and baptism and as we would think,
Yeah.
strictly literal terms, but it's a figurative thing about you're going to have a lot of troubles and you're going to be immersed in big troubles. And, as history, as we see with the disciples later on, that was very much the fact that they all suffered, and all but John were killed. So it's not so he means it really that you will have a lot of troubles that you'd have no idea what you're asking for,
Right.
or you have no idea what's in store for you. I think is one way that's been taken. Yeah. And then he, in verse 42, he kind of reminds all of it. And seriously, another point James made this morning I liked. Again, he said, you've got to put yourself in this parable he was talking about. If you don't put yourself in it, then there's no point in even talking about it. But doesn't that really apply to all of this? If you don't see yourself in it, then it's just kind of an interesting lesson. But put yourself here, and Jesus is saying to you, the world has its own way of thinking of how leadership and how rulers and how the people in authority work. They lord it over us. They dictate this. They dictate that. They say, they're in charge. They're the ones calling all the shots. But whoever wants to become great among you must be the servant. You must, you're not here to be in charge. You're here to serve. And so that's just I think that's just a good reminder for all of us that we're here to serve the world.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what Lynn was saying about, we get into a position that we at first maybe are a little unsure of, and then we get good at it, and then we think we're great. And that tends to be the way that the human mind thinks.
Yeah.
It is a rarity when you find a leader who will follow this, who will be a servant. But when you find them, there's something about that draws people to them. I think I've found a handful of people throughout my life, whether they were my bosses, or they were a Christian leader, a pastor, or just, I think a lot about Jeff's dad, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I learned he was a mentor to me in my life in terms of being a great businessman. He worked for AUL and was a vice president at AUL and helped build that building that's downtown, and was very humble about that when you talk to him about it. And he was a great churchman, and he did things behind the scenes that people don't even know about that benefited hundreds and thousands of people. And there have been a handful of people like that in my life that and every time I run into them, I'm like, ooh, that is so attractive. That is so different, and it's so attractive, and I want to learn from you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key point that he brings out here that is taught. It's very applicable to where we are right now.
Right.
What kind of people are we going to be? And I find within myself this tendency to, when somebody questions what I do well, of saying, well, let me show you a thing or two, and that's the competitive human nature within me that I have to sometimes kind of stamp down and say, okay, wait a minute. That's not what I'm called to do as a Christian.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's well put. Yeah.
To me, it also ties into the prayer about the world. And I know they're really big problems, but this idea of selfishness, I think it is such a driver and a root of so many of the other problems in the world. We have this focus on self-care and to take time for yourself and make sure you feel good and make sure your narrative and forge your way. Trying to raise kids out of that and getting them to focus on selflessness right now and really build that core foundation of serving other people. I think that's one of the main challenges we face. We were just talking about it this morning, but how are we going to get our kids to do more over the summer so that they're going to be better equipped to be good adults and good servants? And, oh man, that's tough.
Yeah, you want to build a community. You don't want to build a world full of individuals who are just for themselves. Jeff?
Yeah, my mom, as we all know, she died of breast cancer, but she had lymphoma for 37 years. Right? That's not what killed her, but she, to your point, she basically always prayed for others. And that's how she kept her mind off of herself. Because I went for 37 years, and she had cancer in and out of her body. She was healed, and would come back. But she said, if you would, and that's what she told me when I went through my cancer experience. Is, you're getting treatment, just pray for us. She had a list, she had a prayer list.
Yeah.
Widows, and the widows list on her refrigerator door that she called weekly just to check on them and see how they're doing. Even if it was just asking what they had for lunch today.
Yeah.
Because people knew that she cared about them and she reached out to them. And they took her mind off herself and it helped heal her, I believe, true. So,
Good.
Well, and the other thing that made me think about was what Cynthia shared, like power is addictive.
Mhm.
You know, and so I think when you get a taste of something that's good, you get a little money, you get a little power, you get a little recognition or praise or whatever that is. Again, in our humanness, it's addictive. I think
Yeah.
that's what's wrong with politics today. You know, they get a little power, they want more. And so that might have been what was going on here too.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay. So don't lord it over others. Be a servant. All right. So verse 46, they arrive at Jericho, and then as they're leaving, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is son of Timaeus, Bar Timaeus. And I got like I'm Bar Willard, which doesn't sound as good as Bartimaeus. You know? Bar Willard? No, I don't think so. So he's blind. He's sitting by the side of the road. He's begging, and here's Jesus is walking by. So he starts shouting at Jesus, and everybody around him tells him to shut up. Why do they tell him to shut up? I mean, there's a big crowd around. He obviously, Jesus. He's still in his popular phase, right? There's big crowds following him, and they tell him to be quiet. So he just starts shouting louder. Good for him. And again, is that a lesson for us in some way?
Yeah.
If the world tells you to shut up,
Yeah,
you should.
I think sometime in life, when you go through difficulty, your situation, even you are sick, right? Like people have cancer, when you pray, the cancer going to tell you, no, God cannot heal you, to be quiet, that you're going to die, that people around him say, no, you don't deserve to call Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And also, why they call him a blind man? Because they try to, identify his issue to his name. Even they don't call his name. They are calling him blind man because he said that he's blind. Like somebody is going through sickness, they can attach that issue to his name. That's why they say no, you don't deserve to call him that to shut
Right.
about. You have to have faith, to say no, that one, you have to know your true identity in Christ.
Right.
Before you can come over every situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Could have
Thank you.
been because he was calling him the son of David. And maybe Jesus had he already declared himself the Messiah?
My understanding is that that's not an uncommon thing for people to have been calling Jesus at that time, that he was fairly often called the son of David or referred to as the son of
People who
David.
believe he's the Messiah.
Yeah. So Bartimaeus, they're not going to shut him down. They're not going to shut him up. He just keeps shouting. He keeps talking to Jesus. He keeps asking Jesus for mercy, which again, maybe isn't a bad lesson for all of us. So Jesus says, call him over here. And Jesus asked Bartimaeus, what does he ask him? He asked him the same thing he asked James and John, right?
Yeah.
What do you want me to do for you?
Exactly.
So Bartimaeus says, well, I want to be able to see. So why does Jesus answer his request, but not John and James? Why doesn't he tell John and James that, oh yeah, you can sit at my right and left hand, but he tells Bartimaeus, your faith has healed you. You can see. What's the distinction here?
Because God decided who was going to be sitting at his right and left. And decision for Jesus to heal him was Jesus' decision, but the decision for who sat on his right and left wasn't his decision, is what he said. It was God's,
Okay.
the Father's.
Okay. Maybe that's a good answer. Why? Okay, let's look at this. Why did John and James make their request? Why did they ask what they asked for? What were they wanted? They wanted glory.
Yeah, they're
Who gets glory when if Bartimaeus gets healed? Who gets the glory?
Jesus.
Jesus gets the glory. Is that the distinction?
Yeah.
That if we ask what we're asking Jesus for, maybe if we're asking for the wrong reason, maybe that's part of the distinction.
Exactly.
That is God or is Jesus glorified by? Would Jesus be glorified by answering our requests, by answering our prayers? If not, then maybe there's no point in asking. Cindy?
I must have been in my study or her sermon or something, but I had some things marked in my Bible on this. And I underlined the word begging. Jesus stopped. What do you want me to do for you? And follow Jesus. And in my notes, I said, what have I begged God for? And I think that's so true. He believed that Jesus could do this for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he begged. He didn't let others stop him. He believed in something and he begged. What am I begging God for? Am I begging for my glory?
Yeah.
I'm begging for God's glory.
God,
Do I
God.
beg or do I say it once and say, oh,
Yeah.
you probably won't do it for me?
Do you think, again, and that goes back to the point we often make, God has his own schedule, his own timetable. And if you ask once and then you give up, well, guess maybe it wasn't that important to you. Again, we don't, God has his plan and his timetable. Liz?
I've been reading a book on prayer, and the author brought a wonderful point that has helped me a great deal, that sometimes, and from the author's perspective, that we're delayed in a sense of getting answers to prayers, the one-off prayer, and suddenly get an answer, because that time of continued asking increases the intimacy you have with God. And that is something that God cherishes and wants with his
Mhm.
children. That if you were suddenly given the one-offs, it wouldn't foster that environment of intimacy with the Father and going before the Father and asking for, having that time. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that, with the Jesus, how Jesus did things and how it went. If it was just, here you go, here you go, here you go, and this man must have been struggling with his, he had the faith to recognize Jesus would heal him, but I wouldn't be surprised that he had been dealing with this for a long time,
Yeah.
So to me, sometimes there's things behind the scenes we don't necessarily see, and God has more of an intention with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Yeah, we don't know. I mean, obviously Bartimaeus has heard of Jesus before and
Mhm.
obviously has faith and believes.
Right.
And again, like to your point exactly, maybe he's been praying for
Mhm.
since Jesus came on the scene. Oh, if Jesus would only walk past my spot here on the road. Whereas John and James is kind of like, oh yeah, well, we could get a throne at Jesus's right and left hand. It's kind of like, well, it just popped into their head. It's just kind of well, that'd be nice, but they haven't struggled with it for 2 years or their
Right.
whole life or anything like that. Yeah, that's a good point. So obvious question: who's the blind person in this passage? Who are the blind people, so to speak, or the deaf people, I guess you could say. They're not really hearing what Jesus is saying. All right. So Bartimaeus,
Amen.
he's healed. He has his sight. Your faith has healed you, Jesus said. Immediately, Bartimaeus received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. So and it kind of like I asked last week, what do you think happened to the rich young man, later on in life? Did he finally change his ways? How far does Bartimaeus follow Jesus, do you think? Is Bartimaeus there in Jerusalem for what's about to happen? I'd like to think so, that if you're going to follow, how far are you willing to follow Jesus? What are you willing to go through to follow Jesus? What are you willing? How far are you willing to go? How long are you willing to stick with it?
Forever.
Forever is, that's certainly what we like to think, but not everybody does. But I kind of like that I like to think about Bartimaeus following him all the way to Jerusalem and being there with Jesus through all of this and still believing and still having faith all the way through. Jeff?
Another question, the way you can phrase that question is, how long are you going to trust Jesus? Not just follow him.
Yeah.
How long will you trust Jesus? Because as long as you trust him, you'll follow him.
Right. Yeah.
As long as you don't always trust him, while you follow him.
Yeah, good. Tim?
I mean, I could take this two different ways. As the following is physically following him wherever he goes, just follow him like with the rest of his people that follow him everywhere he goes.
Yeah.
Or physically following him and kind of being more of a disciple where you're spreading the word amongst other groups of people in a different location.
Yeah, and that's
And
a
I would
good.
think that would be the latter part.
Yeah, that's a good
maybe
distinction.
What it's
Yeah.
meant is that he's continuing to preach the word more as a disciple, as a believer, and I fixed my sight, and so I'm going to be in this section of the area that's going to spread that information.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I didn't really mean literally follow him, but to be a believer for the rest. Now let's ask Bartimaeus. He's been healed. He's got his sight. It's a lot easier for him, isn't it, to follow Jesus the rest of his life than somebody who's prayed for something for years and years and years and has never gotten it. Doesn't feel like they've had their prayers answered, but they still believe, right? That's the tough spot.
I have a question now.
Yeah.
So verse 50, right? So what do you think that, he threw away his garments and he came to Jesus? What is the main reason he had to throw his garments? Is that the old garment is not good, or?
Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to. Maybe because, I guess I picture him as kind of, sitting by the side of the road with they call it a cloak or a coat or some kind of a wrapping, keep him warm or keep the sun off of him. And maybe it's just, if he's going to be moving, it's just not a good thing to be wearing if he's going to be running over and kneeling in front of Jesus or just being able to move, I guess. I don't really know why why he makes a point of talking about him throwing his cloak aside.
Kind of the drama of the moment, I think. Like, you're excited.
Yeah.
Just throw all your stuff down to go and run. It's like the fishermen that threw their nets down.
Yeah, could be. Liz?
I think it shows a sense of what the priority for him, that, something was so meaningful to this man that, or if it were me, something was so meaningful for me, I would leave my purse behind and go engage.
Mhm.
That cloak was probably for them back in that day a very important thing for them to have. I mean, probably had very limited things as a blind man,
Right.
but being able to have this time with Jesus was so precious to this man that he left something of worth to him to go seek that, to have that time with Jesus meant everything. And to me, it's very reflective of his priorities.
Or maybe he just walked back and picked it up before he started following Jesus.
Which is fine,
Yeah.
which is absolutely fine, and I would expect that, but
And he
I,
didn't know what it looked like,
but he
Yeah.
didn't,
because he'd been blind. So he
Right.
didn't know his look.
but he didn't go, oh, wait,
didn't like it when he saw
it's like the young man with his, let me first go do this. No, that wasn't the case. He dropped everything just to have this with Jesus.
Yeah, right, could be. Yeah, and it was a cloak from 1972, so when he came back, he didn't like it at all. It was ugly.
There was that lime
It was the
green.
equivalent of a
Because he
leisure
couldn't see it
suit.
before, it was lime green, and he went,
All
oh,
right.
no.
Okay, so to,
Everybody here was born in 1972.
that's fine.
I was not
That's
born in
fine.
72.
You were
Well,
born way
a couple
before
years
then.
before that.
You didn't miss anything, let's put it that way.
But our parents have started cleaning out, and so that now the relics from the 70s are showing up.
Oh,
in
don't
our
say
house.
relics. Don't say relics.
Cardboard box.
So what are they?
The outside, and the outside, I know the color schemes, because the Afghans are now showing up
Oh,
in
yeah?
our house.
Okay.
So,
That's fine.
Green.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Orange.
Time out. Let's get back to this. Let's get back to the book here. So does Jesus not ask all of us? Is he not really asking all of us, what can I do for you? I mean, isn't that a legitimate question? Jesus, can you not look at it that way? Does Jesus not say to you, what can I do for you? And it's how we answer that we want to be careful about, right? You know, because we're all being asked that question, I think. We're all getting that question constantly. And so so the lesson today, if anything, would be, how are we going to answer that question? How are we answering that question? What are we asking? What are we asking for? And why are we asking for it? That's what I got. Comments, thoughts, suggestions? No? All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be on our way. Dear God, thank you for your class. Thank you for your book. Thank you for your word. Help us to take from this what we can use, what we can put into our lives, what we can do to help those around us. Be with us this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thanks, John. He's coming back.
Yeah.
Not sure. You know, everybody
No.
has those floors
No
now.
shame.
Hard floors now.